It's not often that you get the opportunity to interview a New York Times best-selling business author, but in this episode of GoldCore TV, I do just that when I get a chance to chat with Dr. Stephen Leeb, who is a warm and engaging individual with an immense breadth and depth and wealth of knowledge of both economics and economic history. And in what has become one of my favorite interviews, Stephen drops some truth bombs with respect to the rise of China, the transition from fossil fuels to green energy, and why a new monetary system is on the cards and how that could see gold rise to between $5,000 an ounce and $15,000 an ounce, or even higher. Now, I didn't want to lose any part of this interview, and edit any part of this interview. So what I've done is I've cut it into two parts. So make sure that you watch part two after this one. And as ever, if you want to see more interviews with thought leaders and industry experts in financial markets, subscribe to GoldCore TV and hit the notification bell now. And if you want to learn more about how you can buy, sell, and store physical gold and silver, log on to goldcore.com. Your precious metals experts. Dr. Stephen Leeb, welcome to GoldCore TV.
Thank you, Dave. It's a pleasure to be here.
Now, you have got an impressive track record of being able to predict some of the major trends in the market. Now, whether that's the collapse of the dot-com boom, or whether that's oil going through $100 a barrel. Now, in your latest book, China's Rise and the New Age of Gold, you suggest that China's rise is going to precipitate a new bull market in gold that'll send gold to anywhere from $5,000 an ounce to $15,000 an ounce.
Or even higher, possibly.
Right. Well, I was going to ask you, is there anything now, since you published that book, that would change your mind, or you still think that that is a possibility?
I think it's actually a stronger possibility today than it was then.
Okay.
I mean, I've been watching China pretty carefully for more than a decade. I wrote a book in 2011, which was called Red Alert. And I tried to warn people in that book that China was coming on much more rapidly across the board, not just in terms of a manufacturer of products for the rest of the world, but they were developing their technologies, their education, everything about the country was coming on very, very quickly, and that they would be a real, well, I don't want to say threat, but they would be a real, potential competitor to the United States, and sort of, that was the title of the work. That was why I titled the book Red Alert. And it was well received. It actually won an academic award for, being one of the best foreign books on foreign economics and foreign social issues that year, 2011. And, over the next 7, 8, 9 years, I mean, we basically just assume that, okay, China's large, et cetera. And I don't think that we really saw enough of the significance of what was happening. And now I believe it's not too late. But what I really want to emphasize more than anything, I mean, I've thought about this, since my latest book. And I did say this a little bit, but I think now it has to be really emphasized that I think it's fine to view China as a competitor. Indeed, they are. They have a completely different type of government than we do. But I think it's really a terrible thing to demonize them. I think that they, have a different government. They have a different ethos to their society. I mean, they've been around like 5,000-6,000 years. I mean, they put more emphasis on family structure, et cetera. They're more comfortable in authoritarian society, all of which I wouldn't be comfortable with. But this doesn't mean that we can't also treat them as people with whom we can cooperate. They've done some tremendous work. They've really caught up to an extent that is hard to imagine in terms of some basic research. And there's good evidence that in some things, including AI, even space, which I think is going to be vital in the search for new energies, quantum information and quantum computation, which may never really live up to its full expectations, but still will have a role to play in a new world. China may actually have an edge right now. And goodness, they're in a position to deliberately slow growth in order to get their debt under control, all of which suggests that if we're going to do what I think is essential for us to do, and I think everybody basically agrees that an energy transition is essential, that it's essential to go from fossil fuels to something more sustainable. Solar and wind, of course, are part of that mix. We're way behind where we are. These kinds of energy transitions typically take about 100 years and sometimes more. This one is particularly challenging because A, it involves the entire world, and B, we have such a slow start. I mean, the most scalable of these energies, these new energies that we're talking about, are solar. And right now, solar represents maybe 1% of the world's energy. To go from 1% to something like 40 or 50%, it's going to be a Herculean task. And I don't think we'll get there unless we cooperate with China and Europe. I think this has to be a worldwide effort. And I think we have to recognize that we can cooperate with countries that with whom we don't share the same individual beliefs. There are countries in the world that are different than we are, but a lot of what you read about China these days are just either wholly exaggerated or not true. I mean, they're not awful people. I mean, they do awful things. I mean, they've done terrible things. We've done terrible things. Mankind. This is part of being a human being. There are terrible things that are done. I don't think China is any more terrible than anyone else. And, you have to say that they have brought more people out of poverty than anyone in the history of the world. They've brought about 1 billion people out of abject poverty. And they've also done some, I can list terrible things they've done. I mean, but human rights abuses, in the Northwest province, I'm not going to try and pronounce it because my Mandarin is absolutely, there's nothing there. There's no there as far as Mandarin goes. But yes, they've done, they no doubt have gone too far in trying to correct or in trying to, be a livable country. But maybe they have detained people and maybe they've done some terrible things, but not as much as is presented in the press. They're not the worst human rights violators in the world. I mean, I just hate to say it, but they're not. I mean, what they've done also is in response to, legitimate terrorist threats. They share a border with Afghanistan. And they were being attacked by people that wanted to destroy their country. And yes, they almost surely overreacted and did terrible things. I'm not trying to say they're great. And like I said before, I would never want to live in an authoritarian society like that. I don't want a big brother, even if he's a benign big brother, telling me what to do and how I should live. I mean, we know how that can go astray. It went astray with Mao, it went astray with Stalin, and heavens, I mean, Hitler was, possibly whatever. I mean, I think everybody abhors authoritarianism, but not every type of authoritarianism has to be abhorred. Some can, some authoritarian countries can do very well, and China is an example of a country that is doing very well. Doesn't mean we have to trust them, but we can cooperate with them. That coming back to that word cooperation, Dave, we have to do that. The challenges are so great and they're worldwide. We must cooperate.
And bring it back to an economic point that you made there a minute ago, that China has the ability to, or is attempting to control its growth. Can it control its growth will controlling its growth have a negative impact on the rest of the world?
It's very, very tough to say. I mean, I don't think a dramatic negative impact. No, I think that the part of the growth that they're trying to control right now has to do with their housing, which is where a lot of the debt in the country resides, and getting that under control and accepting the fact that they have to let some of the major builders either restructure or in some cases go bankrupt is not a bad idea. I mean, it will bring their debt under control. And I think that that's very important. But it also illustrates, stark difference between China and the West. I mean, the West is just printing money and debt left and right. I mean, the United States has printed, $9 trillion worth of debt or something that the Fed is holding and buying. I mean, China's almost taking an opposite tact. I mean, they're trying to they want their country lean and mean and to be growing in the right way, which is in terms of new technologies and to be creating renewable technologies. That's where they really taken the leadership. It's Europe and China, but mostly China, that has done, I would say, most for renewable energies. They're the major supplier of solar panels to the rest of the world. I think they're the largest in wind. And this is my own belief that we're probably going to have to go to something like fusion in order to complete this, in order to be fully sustainable and to be not reliant on other, to have all the commodities that we need to run this world, to not be short of any critical commodity, whether it be silver, copper, and especially energy. We're probably going to have to look to outer space. And I mean, that's been thought of, but now I think it's getting real. I recently, in fact, I'm giving something away. I probably shouldn't say, but I recently did an article that hasn't come out yet on fusion as a technology. I'm not going to mention any stocks because there's very few stocks associated with it right now because it's so new, but they've had some real legitimate progress. And China is very much on the forefront of fusion and also fission, the older nuclear technology, the kinds that you do have to worry about waste that's not as efficient as fusion. China could be a great partner. They want to be part of the world, and they recognize that this is a worldwide effort. And I was very happy to hear the virtual meeting between Xi and Biden. And, they spent 3 hours talking to each other. And I think something may come out of it. But, one thing that I do have to emphasize is that, China's belief, and this is basically taken from what they've said, and some of it is in Mandarin. They never released it. Some of it were white papers written after the 2009-10 crisis that we had in this world. And they want a new monetary system. They want discipline in their monetary system. They don't want any country to have the ability to just print money and as an answer to anything. I mean, you cannot have a nearly infinite amount of money chasing a finite amount of goods, or else you end up in terrible shape. I mean, that's a recipe for war. There's only so much, let's say, fossil fuel around, and anybody can print. If one country has the ability to print as much money as they want, they obviously have an edge in terms of obtaining those energies, or those could be other commodities, rare earths, anything, copper. Copper is likely to become scarce. I mean, what we're embarking on right now, Dave, is probably the greatest project humankind has ever taken on. I mean, we are now a worldwide economy. I mean, this is the first time probably in the history of the world that you're seeing the emerging economies with not only a larger economy than the wealthy economies, but also growing much faster. Since between 1950 and 2000, the emerging economies, they didn't grow very fast at all. I mean, all the growth came in the high income area, and the emerging economies just remained emerging. China started to grow maybe in 1990 or a little bit before that. But, even as the new century dawned, I mean, the high income economies dominated the world, and it was a high income world. I mean, in terms of economic growth and defining economic policies, et cetera. Now it's a world, period. I mean, it's economies with income per capita of, let's say, $5,000 to $8,000 a year. In total, are much bigger than the economies with income per capita of $50,000 to $60,000 to $70,000, $80,000 a year. And that's a major change. And China was definitely the catalyst for that change. And the bottom line, this is a worldwide economy right now, and we have to act as such. I mean, we're not going to affect a transition just in the United States or just in Europe or just in Britain or just in Ireland. I mean, we're going to have to affect it worldwide in order for it to make any sense whatsoever, especially given that, there's this green emphasis. I mean, we have to go green. I think we're putting too much emphasis on green right now, though I'm sympathetic to the need to go green, but I think that there's a lot of politicking going on about green, and it's hurting us. And this is the thing that you said, what's changed since I wrote my book. In a roundabout way, the case for a new monetary system, one that imposes discipline on everybody, doesn't allow infinite printing of money, is one that will be gold backed. And I think
so this is just critical. Kind of this is joining the dots with the idea of China's rise and the new age of gold.
That's exactly right.
You're suggesting that we're going to see the emergence of a gold backed currency, gold backed digital currency, or gold backed.
Well, I think it will be digital. There's no doubt about that. And I think China's leading the way. They will introduce a digital currency at the Olympics in 2 months in February. I can't believe the year's almost over, but it is. And February is where they'll be introducing digital currency, and this will.
And this is no longer an ethereal concept. This is actually now happening. I saw a piece on Bloomberg just today talking about the various different technologies for the rollout of this digital currency, whether these digital credit cards are showing how it works on a mobile device, and even people having payment applications in walking sticks. There were myriad of different technologies that are being rolled out to.
It's very usable. I think it's one of the best ways of taking advantage of today's technologies. I think we'll have to go way beyond today's technologies in order to affect this transition. I mean, fusion is still a work in progress, and I think it could play a critical role, as I said before. And that's excuse me, that's a technology that is much different, and it's material oriented. It's not information oriented. There's nothing ethereal about it. I mean, it's really down and in the heart of things, in the heart of the atom, basically. And it's a totally different kind of technology, and the scientists working on it don't know a whole lot about it. Well, they know something about information technologies, but information technologies is what the world has been focusing on for the last 50, 60, 70 years. That's got to trade. I mean, we have to continue to develop information technology, but we've gone nearly as far as we're going to go. I mean, there may be other applications, but we're not going to get that much better at it. I mean, we've reached fundamental barriers in terms of that. I mean, Moore's law, how fast we can make these chips, not too much faster. I mean, now we're focusing on how efficient can we make these chips? How can we make chips that don't use as much energy? Now, that's a different kind of technology. It requires a knowledge of materials, which basically, we haven't focused that much on. We've just used silicon. Silicon's not going to do it. I mean, we're going to have to put something other than silicon into, semiconductors in order to have them energy efficient. I mean, these machines, these massive servers use a lot of energy. And we have to be aware energy is all around us. It's pervasive. And, one thing that I'm worried about, and to be honest, I don't know whether I did a good enough job anticipating it, though I did talk about it a lot, is that there might be a shortage of energy involved in this transition. You're not going to transition from fossil fuels to solar, wind, fusion, etc., without there being a tremendous amount of energy needed. And my goodness, we've never had an energy transition on the order that we're talking about now. First of all, energy transitions in the past have been, I think going from wood to coal in Europe, and then, in the United States, it wasn't done by the entire world at once. I mean, China, I think, was at least 100, 150 years later, and that's why they lost a lot of prominence. They lost really 2 centuries because they were slow on that. This is an energy transition today that the whole world has to participate. We don't have the commodities in the West to do it. We need the commodities that the emerging world has. And
are we talking about oil shortages?
Definitely. I mean, you've seen this already, and I have to admit that I was surprised that you saw it so soon. But we've been basically, pounding the table about green energy. Yes, that's part of it. But, there's a lot of science, and I think credible science, that people don't want to, really accept that there's no doubt that green energy causes world warming. And there's no doubt we want to control it. But before you do that, you can't put the cart before the horse. I mean, you need something to drive green energy, to create it. I mean, you can't make a solar panel without using fossil fuels. And with fossil fuels going up in price, so is solar. I mean, the reason solar became so accepted was because it went way down in price. But again, we're reaching the kinds of limits there that we can't go that much further, to be very honest with you. Now, energy is becoming a much more important part of a solar panel than it was, let's say, 20 or 15 or 20 years ago, or even 10 years ago, because we've reduced the costs in, the materials about as far as we can. And the one cost that we really haven't controlled as much as we should have is the cost of fossil fuels, which are needed to produce solar panels. We absolutely need them. And you've seen solar panels go up in price recently. So has wind. I mean, these steel turbines, I mean, they're very energy intensive. And if we're ever going to start exploring outer space to get the commodities that we need, you're going to need a lot of energy. Mining copper is very intensive. And in fact, the copper mines that we have in the West that we use, those in Chile, et cetera, their grades are a fraction of a gram. And it costs tremendous energy to get this copper out of the ground. We've used up, we don't have a lot of virgin mines around. And other than in the developing world and, Africa, et cetera. And, that's really more China's world than our world.
And this is all when we have, at the time of recording, we've got oil at $80 a barrel. So that's causing a problem at oil at $80 a barrel. But if you're suggesting that we might see more shortages, which is going to exacerbate the problem.
I think it's nearly certain. I mean, oil was at, it hit over $100, about 110 or 20. I think oil was headed for $200, as I said in that one book, which I basically was wrong. But I was wrong for a reason that is not a good reason to be wrong. In other words, I think fracking was a terrible mistake. I think we should have let the world accept higher oil prices and adjust to them. But instead, we came up with fracking, and fracking was a losing venture. I mean, depending on how you do the calculations, the U.S. may have lost as much as $1 trillion in developing fracking. I mean, there have been some successful companies. Don't misunderstand me, but there have been a tremendous number of bankruptcies. Just not affordable. And it takes a lot of energy to frack. I mean, it's the same problem that we have with, these renewables. You can't do them without using energy. Now, fracking was energy positive. In other words, the energy we got out of fracking was probably more than the energy we put in, though. You look at some data on energy intensity in the United States, and you see it actually increasing as we started using fracking. I mean, this is no way to run a world. But I mean, in the end, basically what it cost us was extra time to adjust to higher energy prices. And now you see oil at $80, and people are, I mean, I'm not trying to say anything against our president, but it wasn't his fault that he inherited a world in which he's placed in a position where he has to beg the Saudis, or not, maybe implore is a better word, the Saudis. And it was also asking President Xi whether or not he would be willing to release oil from his reserves. Well, this is not a temporary problem we're dealing with right now. This is something that's going to follow us around. And, the problem is you have a court in the Netherlands telling Royal Dutch they cannot explore for oil anymore because, the carbon content, et cetera. Well, you just can't have it both ways. Unfortunately, you just have to accept the fact that carbon may continue to increase. And, the UN has published reports on the consequences of what happens if world temperatures increase considerably more than they have. What would be the consequences to the world if they go up, like, instead of 1.5 degrees, if they go up 4 or 5 degrees? What's the consequences? And you know what? This is the UN saying this. There will be consequences, but they'll be manageable. In fact, long-term growth to the end of this current century might be affected by 0.5%. I'm from less than that, a fifth of 1%. They might go from 2% to 1.9, something like that. It's not going to be an existential crisis if we don't manage the amount of green in the amount of carbon in the atmosphere. If we don't get as green as we want to get, that will not be an existential crisis. But it will be. It could be serious. It could, cause a lot of harm, etc. But not as much harm as if we simply run out of oil and can't do anything about it. I mean, that's the existential crisis, and that's what people have to get their arms around, and that is our biggest challenge right now. Let's
just bring the conversation back to gold, and in particularly the idea of gold-backed currency. Do you think that it's specifically a move by China to a digital currency, and in some way backing that by gold, that is going to be the driver that will send gold higher?
My guess is yes.
That's the end of part 1. Go straight to part 2 by clicking here and learn more about how China is paving the way for a gold-backed digital currency. And as ever, if you want to see more interviews with thought leaders and industry experts in financial markets, subscribe to GoldCore TV and hit the notification bell now. And if you want to learn more about how to buy, sell, and store physical gold and silver, log on to goldcore.com, your precious metals experts.